he's like ducking, like in the back seat. Follow that cab. Don't lose it. Follow it. Just keep going. It's like, shit, man. Where'd that come from? That was out of left field. But you couldn't have had even just like a little something, a little. Beep. Is that not the story of Bond's life? Constantly fighting battles, both personally as well as for Queen and country. But that's the profession he chose, and it's what makes Bond a literary hero.
Bond. James Bond.
Good morning. My name's Bond. James Bond.
Solitaire.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
Who are you?
Bond. James Bond.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
Bond. James Bond.
Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Sammy Legend's James Bond Show. I am Sammy Legend, and today we will be going over another book review. The last one I did was Devil May Care. Today we will be going over Solo by William Boyd. This book now, I don't know, it was different. It's not a traditional kind of Bond book. I guess we'll get into that stuff in a little bit, but I would like to point out that the binding on that is really cool. It's like all cut up and stuff. It just looks insanely cool. This is the only book I've ever seen that does something like that. I think that's really cool. And then also another cool detail, these black, it's a gold background and it's got the the vertical black stripes here. If you take the dust cover off, you can see it here too. It keeps that striping pattern on the book itself. Really, really cool detail. So that is probably one of my biggest highlights about the book, and it's literally just how it physically looks. But, like they say, don't judge a book by its cover. But we gotta jump into this. It's not a bad book. Okay, let me start there. This book is broken up into 5 different parts. The very beginning of this book, I thought it was very, very incredibly well written. It was very Fleming-esque, and the descriptions of Bond's train of thought and like his food and his drink, it was so Fleming. It was like almost spot on. It was crazy. But those are, as David Zaritsky says, those are the James Bond lifestyle moments. And the more that I read about those moments, those everyday life, the real life moments that we all share, the more I enjoy them. And I'm actually at the point in my life where I enjoy those immersive descriptions of like seemingly unimportant, boring descriptions, boring scenes, and I enjoy those as much as I do the action scenes in a novel. That's just where I'm at. Chapter 2 of part 1 is called the Jensen FF, which, by the way, is a really, really cool looking car. Very cool looking. It's kind of unique. There's not a whole lot of stuff that looks like it. I think they would probably classify that as like a shooting brake, if you know what that is. I think that's generally that type of shape and styling. In that chapter, I had massive Goldfinger novel, not the movie, Goldfinger vibes when Bond is searching Bryce's house. Bryce Fitzjohn, who is kind of like a Bond girl fake out. You think she might be the Bond girl of the story, but she's not. She's a ploy, I guess. But she's still a very pivotal part of the story. And Bond is searching her house because there's supposedly a party. You know, she invited him there, and he goes to her house, and she's not there. And he's searching her house, and that's the vibes I had from when I was reading Goldfinger. When Goldfinger drops him off, and him and Oddjob leave, and Bond is just, you know, spying on everything in his house and checking out everything, and finds the cat and the recorder and all that stuff. Like, I had those kind of vibes here when Bond is checking out Bryce's house. Also in this same chapter, Bryce uses the F word. What the? And that is shocking.
Shocking. Positively shocking.
To see the F word actually spelled out in the book, especially this early. Like, it was jarring almost. But I actually, after this, I started counting the F words after the second one. I was like, oh, so this is the thing now in this book. That's how this is going to go. All right, well, I'm going to keep track of this. And I started counting after the second one, and there was actually a total of 5 F words throughout the book. This book would definitely be rated R if it was a movie. That's for sure. It was said in the Ian Fleming books, but he used a line, like a long hyphen, in place of the word, to like edit it out a little bit. But that's a sign of the times. You know, back then the F word wasn't so commonplace like it is today, and that word has actually become very diluted. It's not really shocking anymore when someone says it. It was shocking to me reading a Bond book. You know, this was written in 2013. It was still shocking to see because it's a James Bond book, and I have yet to read one that actually has that in there, let alone 5 times. I just can't believe that it was in there 5 times. And the old ones, you know, they didn't have it at all. Just that hyphen to edit it out. And also in the very end of part 1, you can see the juxtaposition between current day Bond and World War II Bond. Well, actually, really throughout all of part 1, not even at the end, just throughout the whole thing. And that comes into play later in the novel too, his World War II experience. So it's kind of cool that we see it at the beginning of the novel, you know, which is also something that I haven't read all of these books yet. I've read most of them. I've read all the Flemings and a few of the continuations, but none of them ever really touch on his World War II experience, at least the ones that take place back then. And it was so cool to see that. That was actually really cool. A different aspect of the novel. And like we don't even see that in the movies. You know, his military history and experience is like hardly ever really mentioned or anything. But that was really, really impressive to see that they actually incorporated something like that into the book and to kind of go back and forth. I usually don't like time jumps in movies or books, but it was kind of cool to go back and forth, and they weren't long drawn out scenes. And I think that's probably why I was okay with it, because, you know, World War II for like, you know, maybe a page or two, and then back to Bond in present day. It was really cool. It was a cool juxtaposition between the two time frames. The beginning of part 2 is the first chapter is called Elements of Risk. Elements of risk is right. As Bond thinks, and I'm quoting here, it all seemed a bit vague, a bit wing and a prayer, a bit improvised. But maybe this was what a mission to a civil war-torn West African country involved. To me, it seems quite a bit risky and unorthodox of MI6 to be sending, we know, he is to be sending their best man to a country to stop a war or potentially stop a war with minimal information and support from MI6. I can't think of a time in any of the other novels that this has happened. If it has, it definitely was not to this extent. But I was like, what is happening? Why is this? This is not Bond. And also, that initial interaction scene with M was so short and uninspiring, like it almost seems shoehorned into the novel. Maybe that was because this entire chapter was just an exposition dump about a physical country, and the chapter, it just lacked some that Bond pizzazz, I guess. And there's been much better Bond M interactions in other books, and I also, one of the hardest things is probably my biggest gripe with this book is the location. Zanzarim or Zanzarim, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. In my head I kept pronouncing it Zanzarim, but that's the problem. It's a fake location. You don't know how to pronounce any of these things in this book. There's later on there's the we'll get there, but it's the Kololo Causeway, Kalalo Kolo. I have no idea because it's fake. I don't like the fake locations that Bond goes to. It's so hard to get your geography right when it's all fictional. The location, like even if you haven't been there before to a certain location, but you've heard of certain cities or street names or anything like that, you can kind of get your bearings a little bit. You can't do that at all in this. It's all fake. The entire time he's in Africa, I had no clue what was the geography and all that stuff. It's not easy to read when there's artificial locations. Seriously, I think there's a few other big gripes I have about this book, but I would say the overall one that spans like almost the whole length of the book is this fictional location. I don't like that. There's also a lot of uneasiness and coincidence going on in this book up to this point. And Bond mentions that fact too, like almost incessantly. He's always mentioning that, which goes back to his interaction with M. He's being sent off on a mission where he has very minimal information and like no backup and support. But yeah, there's so much. That's why he's uneasy, and the coincidence. Yeah, it's like one after the other after the other after the other throughout quite a bit of the book. When he does finally get to Zanzarim, Boyd actually, you can tell that he kind of makes a point to differentiate the cultural differences of, say, like the West or Western world, England, United States, and he compares that to the culture of Africa, of Zanzibar. And you can definitely tell that there are some stark differences between the two types of lifestyles. There's a chapter called Christmas. Going into it with that title, I didn't know what to expect. But really, there was like nothing I got out of it. All Bond does is look at a map to familiarize himself with the geography of Zanzarim, which would kind of be helpful for the reader to actually be able to see this map for real, in real life, because where is this location? It's so hard to comprehend where things are in the book. the chapter right after that, he meets the real Bond girl of this book, Blessing, or Alicia, as we find out later. She's the real Bond girl, and similar to, we'll get there, but similar to With a Mind to Kill and Devil May Care, the Bond's relationship with the Bond girl is not traditional, like how everything plays out. There's so you got Christmas, Blessing, and then the two of them in chapter 6 of part 2, called Syrian Burgundy Type. They're sitting together and they're talking about the moon, and that bit was really, really nice. It was thought provoking. You know, humans have been there, and you know, having been there, we definitely take it for granted now when we look up and we see the moon at night. I can only imagine how it felt back in '69, and how it may have lost its allure, as Bond says, to which Blessing responds, "I don't agree. It seems to belong to us more now, not some distant symbol." And both of those thought processes are interesting. You know, how and they can almost be separate but also take place at the same time. You know, it has lost its allure, but it does like seem to belong to us, you know, as a human race more now, because we have been there. It's not some, you know, distant location that we strive to reach. We have been there, you know. It's just really cool. I guess that's another juxtaposition, actually, now that I've said that. Kind of like the Bond and in present day in World War II at the beginning of the book. That thought process kind of is juxtaposition as well.
Wow. Now there's a mouthful.
Oh man, so now it took until page 94, roughly a third of the way through the book. But finally, we have an action scene. 94 pages. Like, I was counting them out. I was like, oh, let me flip to it real quick. Let's do this together. Halfway down the page, right here, it even says, "The night erupted in gunfire." So halfway down page 94 is when we get our first actual action scene in the novel. Like I said, almost a third of the way through the book. Not that the first third was boring, because, you know, it's setting up the plot and the characters and the mission, and I get that. But you couldn't have had even just like a little something? A little beep, beep, a little something? 94 pages. That's like almost half of a Fleming book. But either way, we finally did get an action scene, and it was violent. Man, was it violent. It was violent and scary. That was, to be the first action scene in the book, that takes your heart away. It gets your blood pumping like that. It is like, okay, we're off. Here we go. So you got people's arms getting blown off and all this stuff, and yeah, Bond and Blessing running away, laying down in the grass, trying to, you know, he's trying to protect her and not get shot. It was a really, really cool action scene. Honestly, not in my top, 3 or 5, but I would say in all the books I've read so far, that's probably eking into the top 10 there a little bit. It was really good. Shortly thereafter, you have a chapter called what I mentioned earlier, the Battle of Kololo Causeway. That's how I'm going to pronounce it anytime going forward if I say that word again. Kololo. Because I have no idea how to pronounce it. That was a turning point in Bond's favor. It was delivering to Bond, by flipping the script a little bit, an advantage over Cobus Breed, who is our villain in this book. And just like every other Bond villain, he has to have some sort of deformity. I talked about it in Devil May Cry in the last one. He had, like a monkey paw. Here, Breed has like 2 bullet holes underneath his left eye. And that eye is always crying, always weeping. He's always dabbing at it. And so, it provides an advantage for Bond over Breed, showing that Bond really does know his stuff and can operate the logistics of this war better than Breed can. Because Breed even passes it off to him. He basically says, okay, you figure it out. What can we do? How can this go our way? And through the actions, the directions, the orders that Bond gives to Breed and his men, they retake Kololo. And which was also, by the way, it was real short. It was like, I think maybe 2, maybe 3 pages of that scene taking place, that war scene, which also to see like a traditional kind of war scene in a James Bond book, that's also different and kind of cool. But I really liked it. It was a really, again, blistering pace, just like the first action scene. And I imagined some sort of like cool cinematic style war scene taking place. I really, really did enjoy that scene, both for the action and the fact that it's kind of a turning point in Bond's favor. The last chapter in part 3, Import-Export, when Bryce fits John, she comes back into the novel. Bond goes to see her because he needs to get a passport. So Bond goes to see her, and she's commenting on his scars over his whole body. And she says, and he says that he had a difficult and dangerous war. And she responds with, "You're still fighting it, so it seems." You're still fighting it, so it seems. Is that not the story of Bond's life? Constantly fighting battles, both personally as well as for Queen and country. But that's the profession he chose, and it's what makes Bond a literary hero. But again, thought-provoking like the moon conversation earlier, I do like that. I had a difficult and dangerous war. And she says, "You're still fighting it, so it seems." To kind of, if you read that and pause for a second and kind of take that in and put yourself in Bond's mind about his experiences in the war and the things that he went through, that would be his harrowing experiences. That would, a dangerous and difficult war. And he's still fighting it, like she says. Still getting new battle scars every mission he goes on. So Bond more or less stops the war, and as Breed and his men are leaving Zanzirim, both Breed and Blessing shoot Bond and leave him for dead. Blessing shoots him, and you think, well, that just okay. Because she comes back into the book after being gone for a long time. Like, Bond thinks she's dead. And she comes back in, like, literally just waltzes into the room, takes the gun from Breed, and shoots Bond. And they both leave. It's like, shit, man. Where'd that come from? That was out of left field. She's just back into the novel and shoots Bond. She's a bad guy now. Especially after all they had been through. It seemed like they had a pretty good relationship, and, they had sex.
There's no sense in going off half-cocked.
And it was just, again, kind of shocking to see her just come back into the novel. But I had an inkling, I had a suspicion that after that shootout in the forest, when she leaves Bond, because she's just in hysterics and she leaves Bond, we, as the reader, we don't know if she's dead or alive. So in the back of my mind, after reading a whole bunch of these James Bond books, I was like, well, there's no way she's dead. There's no way she's dead. And, well, sure enough, like a third of the book later, she comes back. Some time passes, and Bond ends up in D.C., where he starts to put all the puzzle pieces together and acquire the tools and equipment.
You get the equipment, I'll send the messages. Second thoughts, you type.
Tools and equipment, guns.
New Walther. How's cute to get me one of these.
To take down Breed. And he even goes into the Africa Kin headquarters in D.C. Africa Kin, by the way, is the company that Breed works for. And so Bond goes into their headquarters, and after he leaves, this is a part that I really don't like in the book. Like, aside from Zanzibar being a fake location, like one of the singular events that I don't like is this part right here. He leaves the headquarters and he gets lost in his thoughts, and he walks past his hotel into a bad neighborhood. That leads into the chapter called Switchblade. And the beginning of this chapter is very unlike Bond. Very unlike Bond. He beats up kids.
Effective immediately. Your license to kill is revoked.
Yes, he was defending himself, but it still somehow seems quite a bit out of character. But this short section is ended with, the 3 dots at the bottom of the page to signify that some time has passed, and we see Bond again in his hotel. So he left their headquarters and he's walking back to his hotel, and then all this happened. Instead of him getting lost in his thoughts and walking into a bad neighborhood, why didn't we just omit the whole Switchblade scene altogether and cut to Bond in the hotel room a short time later? Well, that's because of the ending, and we'll get to that in a moment. But that's probably my least favorite part of the book, but immediately following that is one of my favorite parts of the book. It's James Bond actually doing spy stuff. Actual spy stuff. He's at the restaurant and he sees Blessing there, and he knows that she's going to see him and she's going to react. At this point, he thinks that she's still...
Use your words.
What an idiot! A bad guy working for Africa Kin. So he sets a trap. He just talks to the maitre d' for a moment, and he leaves. And he knows that Blessing has seen him. And he sets a trap. An ant trap, as they say in the book. And there's a saying called pissing on the ants in the book, as Bond says. And going from there, he gets a cab, and he's sitting down in the back seat, and he waits, and 90 seconds later, Blessing comes running out and, looking out around, like, whoa, where'd he go? She comes running out of the restaurant, and she takes her own cab, and Bond follows her. And, he's, ducking, in the back seat. Follow that cab. Don't lose it. Follow it. Just keep going. Just following him. It's just so cool to actually see him spying and doing things like that. It was really, really cool. And like he said, pissing on the ants, getting them all, all the bad guys, they don't know what to do. What's going on? This guy that we left for dead in an African country is now here in D.C. What the hell? Really, really cool part of the book. And then you have the ending. So, it turns out, you're introduced to a bunch more characters. You're introduced to Felix Leiter.
Felix!
And his nephew. And it turns out that Blessing really isn't a bad guy, and she was like a double agent or a triple agent.
So what are you, a triple agent?
And she's now working for the CIA. And so then she makes it up to Bond, all that bad stuff that happened. She makes it up to Bond by screwing his brains out.
He was pretty vigorous last night as well.
Did you? I don't know he was that desperate.
That part of the book is quite explicit, we'll say. Like, did I just get into like some kind of 50 Shades of Grey or romance novel or something? Like, what is this? Like, this is not, like, just like they use the F word multiple times, the sex scenes in this book are also quite explicit. But so they end up having sex, and then Bond leaves and comes back, and he finds Blessing murdered by Breed. He knows that Breed did it. So that's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and Bond goes to the African, like, you got the main downtown DC headquarters, and then they have a building way out in the country that is all the planes that they're flying in and out of Zanzirim. They land in DC and they bus these kids from the airport to this building. And it turns out that those kids are actually drug mules, and they're bringing drugs into America. So Bond ends up staking out the place for a little bit, and he goes in and he has a massive confrontation. Well, I wouldn't even call it a confrontation. I don't even know how to describe it, but he climbs up on, he's doing all this crazy stuff in like the perimeter, inside the perimeter of this building, and takes out all the guards, and then he climbs up on top of the building and he lures Breed out the front door. And Bond, it's one of these really old-fashioned buildings with all the amazing decor, and Bond finds this ball that's kind of loose in its holder, and he grabs this giant ball and he walks to the edge and he's holding it, and he waits, looking down, he waits for Breed to come out to talk to try and get a hold of his guards out in the yard, and Bond drops the ball. And the description is quite horrific. All the crunching and bones breaking, and it's gross. And then, so Bond climbs down, and Breed goes to shoot at Bond, and the bullet skims Bond's gun, and his gun goes flying. But then, he gets rid of Kobus's gun, and he's already gotten like a 50-pound ball from like 30 feet up coming down on his shoulder. His elbow exploded out, and so you got that. And then Bond like kneels on his chest, like crushing his ribs. So there's that. And then he flips him over, and he takes the switchblade from earlier and stabs him in the back of the neck, severing his spinal cord.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Now, I still think that part earlier in the book with the switchblade should have been omitted, and he wouldn't have even needed to do that in this scene at the end. Like, just alter the ending a little bit to make it slightly more Bond-like. Like, Bond character-like, because beating up the kids is not Bond-like. So now to have him fighting the bad guy, okay, fine. It's still kind of on Bond-like, but have him drop the ball, kneel on his ribs or whatever, and I don't know, or just alter it, and as he goes, he's laying on his stomach, and as he rolls over, that's when he shoots at Bond. I mean, you could end it there, and have it be, Bond's defending himself at that point, and he like steps aside from the bullet and quickly shoots at Breed and kills him. That would be a good ending that way. But that's supposedly how he dies. And then Bond goes downstairs, and he finds one of the other minor characters of the book drugged up because of there's multiple brothers that like run this country in Africa, and like they killed one of them, and now they drugged this other one to make him comply with them trying to make him run the country their way. It's a lot of confusing stuff. But so he's drugged up, and then Felix and Felix's nephew arrive, and they go outside, and Breed is missing. And then that leads into the very end of the book, which is where Bond goes back and to Bryce, and they're sleeping together, and he gets up in the middle of the night because he hears something, and he goes outside to investigate, and he is highly suspecting that it's Breed. So he goes back in, he leaves a note for Bryce basically saying, sorry, this isn't going to work out. And he goes off and gets in his car, and he rides off into the sunrise instead of the sunset. The sun's rising, and, you know, he's just suspect of that person making that noise and footprints in the yard and all that. He thinks that's Breed, and he's going to go after him. So that's how the novel ends, and that could have led into a sequel. It never did. But all in all, I'd say it's a slightly weaker entry in the whole series because a lot of the stuff is very un-Bond-like. A fake location, Bond beating up kids, the absolute violent way that he dispatches of Breed. I mean, I guess there are some ways in the books and the movies where he does do violent stuff, so I guess I can forgive that a little bit. But still, it didn't. And you know, MI6 sending him off with like minimal information. It's very much not in line with how James Bond is traditionally written. But all in all, I think that I would give this book, out of 5 stars, I'd say probably a solid 3. I think we'll go 3 stars on this. It is fun. It's kind of a breezy read. Really cool scenes, action scenes. The descriptions are great. It sucks that it's in a fake location, and there's a few scenes that are very un-Bond-like, like not his character. So yeah, 3 stars. Definitely a book to read if you're a completionist of reading all the Bonds, and even if you're not, it's still a fun, entertaining read. And then next, I'm into the John Gardners finally. I'm into License Renewed. That's the next one I'm reading, and I'm hoping that those are okay. I have seen some Calvin Dyson video reviews on all these John Gardners, and they do seem to be kind of out there. But we'll see how it goes. This was another episode of Sammy Legend's James Bond Show. I am Sammy Legend. I thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Shaken, not stirred.